My name is Drew Harris, and welcome to SaaS Growth, where we talk about SaaS companies growing and scaling. And today we have Steve with us, and Steve is an expert in regards to our topic today. So our topic is moving from an engineer to a manager and that transition. So Steve, if you'd like to introduce yourself and tell the audience a little bit about you and what you do.
Thanks so much, Drew. Yeah, I spent over 20 years as a software engineer and the leader of various engineering departments. And like we were talking earlier, I've experienced those challenges that I hear all the time about brilliant technical people who then find themselves, for whatever reason, moving into a people management role or even higher. Maybe they sought out the role, or maybe they felt pressured into accepting it, but they're finding that the very things that made them successful as a hands-on, technical person now get in their way as they try to lead and manage human beings and collaborate with new kinds of peers on broader organizational topics.
I see.
What I've discovered since then is that while the overall theme of those talent challenges tends to have a lot in common, each person's specific challenges, hang-ups, their strengths, their opportunities, they're unique. Even if their employer offers some sort of formal management training, which most of them don't,
Oh, really?
those growing leaders tend to benefit from more personal support to overcome those internal barriers that limit their success,
I see.
with new mindsets, skills of influence and collaboration. And their bosses, even if they've become successful themselves, don't necessarily have the coaching skills to help those emerging leaders to find their own success. Even if they do, they don't tend to have that environment because the employer relationship may not lend itself to the kind of transparency and vulnerability that's needed to help them uncover the root of those challenges and the growth opportunities. It took me almost 10 years and the help of a professional coach that I hired for myself for me to realize that I could have a greater impact on the world really by deliberately stepping away from personal day-to-day active engineering management and becoming a trained professional leadership coach myself to help others with their skills so they can advance and avoid what I like to call promotion remorse. That's been my full-time work for the last 2.5 to 3 years.
Okay. All right. Well, let's dig into that topic. I love this. So I was talking with you before too. I experienced a similar sort of situation where I grew up, if you will, in corporate world as an engineer. And I found myself in situations where I was surprised sometimes at the confidence that people had in me and my abilities. They seemed to have more confidence than I did on more than one occasion. And I was like, okay, well, I guess I can do this sort of mentality. And one of those was, even though I had ran my own SaaS business for a number of years, been a CEO, had a sales force, managed people, I had done it, but I was back into a corporate role. And in this corporate role, I was recruited as a principal engineer to be the hands-on keyboard, writing the code, modernizing the stack. And I was leading from a technical perspective, the team, and even helping hire people and building the team out. But nobody reported directly to me. I wasn't doing like performance reviews or anything like that. And we got acquired by another company. And that company said, hey, can you move this highly successful team that you built over to this other project that is the forefront of what we want to do as a company? And can you manage the team yourself and be a manager? And I was kind of shocked. I was like, really? I guess so. Sure. So is that a similar story to what you've heard in some of your coaching experiences where people find themselves almost surprised that they're in this position being offered a management position? Is that something that you've encountered before?
It seems to me, from my experience, it seems about half and half. Some of
Okay.
them, I really want to go into management, and many times it's because they have a misunderstanding about what management will get them,
Mhm.
but they pursue it. And in other cases, I don't want this, and they're pressured into it. But we've got to have somebody, and you're the best
Yeah.
engineer. We really need you. So there's a wide range,
Okay.
a
Yeah.
spectrum of where people tend to fall.
Yeah. I've seen the other side too, like you mentioned, where I've encountered engineers as I've led engineers where people are, they think that the only way to advance is to become a manager. I
Mhm.
see that a lot. And so, well, there's no other career track for me. There's no other way for me to make more money and have more influence. So I'm the next logical step is to become a manager. And okay, I need to do that for myself and for my family. And, and they feel like they have to do it. And sometimes they want to do it. They're like, oh, well, I'm really good at project management, so I'll be good at people management.
Mhm.
And, there's just a variety. Like you said, everyone's unique. Everyone has their own stories, and that's okay. Um, I I have found the usefulness of a coach myself. And so I think um, I'll tell a brief story to kind of illustrate this, where my son-in-law is becoming a financial planner. Financial planner for a company. He's just getting ready to graduate from college. He was interviewing with this company, and part of his interview process was, I need you to go talk to people and ask these 6 questions and interview 15 people. And one of the primary questions that he asked is, have you ever dealt with a financial planner before? And the answer most of the time was, no, I haven't. And would you be open to it and tell me about your experience? And what he found was those people who have encountered that before were very open to it and had very positive things to say. So I feel like it's the same sort of scenario in regards to coaching, where, hey, I've encountered a coach before, I'm all for it. I would love to participate or, be a part of that, versus I've never done that before and I'm hesitant. I'm, not sure about that. What does that look like? Can I just do a training program? Can you tell me a little bit about how people come to you and what that process looks like? And when they engage with you, like, are they always like, oh yeah, I'm excited? And I wouldn't imagine they are, but tell me what that looks like for you.
Yeah, people come in multiple of ways. In some cases, we've had a conversation just casually,
Mhm.
and I'm able to just in 30 minutes or so ask them probing questions where they get to experience what a coaching question is like.
Mhm.
Not a full coaching conversation. We don't come and set up an agenda or whatever, but they
Right.
get to see that, and it's enough of an interest to say, I would like to have more of this. I'd like to have a deeper conversation.
Okay.
And many times, in a couple of times, they would just reach out and they say, I am so invested in my own career, I'm just going to pay for this myself.
Mm.
In another case, somebody went to their boss and said, if you want me to take this management position, I will do it if you will pay for coaching for me, because I know that there are things that I need to develop in order to succeed. So they made it almost a condition of accepting the position.
Mm.
And in other cases, it would be the senior leader who knows I'm moving people up, or maybe
Mhm.
I've moved people up a little bit faster than was good for them. And
Mm.
so they see this person has great potential. I
Mhm.
want to help them succeed. And so they will introduce the two of us. And so the
Okay.
senior leader becomes the sponsor. And I've seen great success there. And the person was able to grow, change, overcome things, say how much of an impact it had on them personally. Their phrase was, I became a different person through the coaching, in their reflection. And their supervisor, the one who was sponsoring the coaching, was able to look at, we had a meeting in the midpoint, and I just asked the sponsor, what have you noticed about this
Mhm.
person and their change? And the sponsor was able to enumerate, I noticed this, this, and this, 3 different things, the very things that we had been working on.
Oh,
So,
good.
and so it's just been a very positive experience.
Sure, sure. So, what are some of the things that you've encountered? Because you've encountered a lot more than I have, that people need to work on as they move and make that transition into a people leadership role. And we'll get to this question later. I'm not trying to bombard you with a bunch of questions, but I'm also curious about what's the difference between like a tech lead, where it's the technical leader of the team, versus a people leader.
Mhm. I see about 5 really umbrella themes of things that people often struggle with. Of those, all 5 of them are relevant to people moving into a people management. 2 of them, I would also say, are relevant for people in a more informal technical leadership, such as a staff engineer or
Mhm.
a principal or architect role, where it's about the influence side of leadership as opposed to the positional person responsibility.
Okay.
Um, those 5 things.
Yeah.
Is there one area you'd like me to start with?
Um, Start wherever you think is, I mean, I don't know what those areas are. So go right ahead. Just
Okay.
lead us through it if you
So
would.
if I think about the ones that are specific to, well, let's start with ones that are just general, that
Okay.
are really more any kind of influence. And that is one is just the internal self leadership of being able to really discern and then honor priorities.
Hmm.
So as a technical leader, there are so many things competing for attention because now you've got a broader responsibility over, well, sometimes it's just the technology of your team, but you're still responsible for some coaching, some mentoring, other
Mhm.
things like that. And as the technical leadership grows, architecting across multiple disciplines, and then it's about being able to think both strategic and tactically, and then understanding the difference between leading and lagging indicators of success. What are my
Mhm.
KPIs versus my OKRs, and how are they different? And what are the things that I can measure about myself, about my team, that may even be leading indicators even to the KPIs?
Ah, I
And
see.
then thinking about the balance of calendaring versus inbox versus to-do list, and the pressure of trying to wrangle all 3 of those competing voices of what should I be doing next.
Mhm.
And then just managing synchronous versus asynchronous channels of communication, and
Mhm.
importance versus urgency, and how those things get communicated. That's all just the umbrella of the priorities. And
There's a
that's
lot there.
many of them. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot there. And yeah, I've seen that as an engineering leader myself, how important that is. And those leaders who don't do that well, whether you're just a technical leader or you're leading people, they fail, quite frankly, because they're moving really. What I see often, and maybe you've seen this too, from my perspective as a fractional leader, is I come in and I help where SaaS companies are growing and scaling, and they're just moving from one fire to another because they've got so much issues and tech data. It's a lot of what I do is similar to what you do. It sounds like, in helping people in that regard, but I'm helping more at a company level,
Mhm.
versus an individual level. But that's a very common thing that I see. So if you find yourself in that situation, dear listeners, if you're needing help from the company side, I'm your man. And if you need help from the individual side, it sounds like Steve is definitely your man. So go on and tell us about the next issue.
So the next one is really about learning how to tailor your communication to the person that you're talking to.
Mhm.
So many times, the person who understands the deep technical details thinks that everybody else wants to understand the deep technical details. And as the scope and the breadth of the type of person that you interact with grows, learning to tailor what you're going to say to them makes a difference. So part of it is just learning the skill of empathy to even understand what the other person wants to get out of the conversation, as opposed to what you want to say in the conversation. Learning that empathy is a big challenge. And then learning to bottom line, start with the bottom line up front. What's the summary? And then we can reserve the details only if they really need them, versus spending my time just trying to process verbally, figuring out what I want to say as I'm saying it. So many of us are verbal processors, and that can just get in the way. Or we have spent so much time figuring out the answer that to just give the answer when that's what the CEO is asking, when can this be done by? And we want to explain all of the process that we went to figure out the answer because it sounds so impressive.
Yeah.
We want to take that opportunity. Just being able to give direct answers to direct questions is often a challenge.
I can see that too with the problem solving aspect, because as engineers, that's what we do, and we solve problems, and we want to iterate and talk about the problem and how we solved it. And and outages, that's one thing that came to mind as you were talking, like, okay, well, why were we down? Why did the service go down? Or why did we have this business interruption? And as a leader, you need to, like you said, need to be able to articulate that bottom line, concise, to the point, rather than, well, it started over here and then we went over here and then over here, and then this is what I found, and then we dug into this side thing and we found these logs, and they don't need to hear all that. They really don't. So that's excellent advice. Very insightful.
The peers want to hear that advice, and we're used to talking at that level of detail because it gives somebody else a chance to challenge our assumptions and work through things.
Sure.
People in a different role, it's not helpful.
Sure. So framing your conversations in the viewpoint of the people that you're talking to. So you're framing those conversations and the insights that you're providing to the audience. When I first started working in product, that was one thing that got hammered into me. I was in a big corporation and I was doing presentations for executives, and different types of executives have different viewpoints as well. And, know your audience and help them understand that concisely and precisely. Like you need some of those details. Sometimes they need to be available. You need to be able to speak to them. But like you said, start with the bottom line. And then as they ask, you can go into those details, or as you need to describe certain details, they're readily available. So excellent. Thank you. What else you got?
Then when it comes to moving into formal people management, I love the fact that you're doing podcasts. Podcast is how I learned the skill of management, because I did not have good management training early on. My go-to podcast was the Manager Tools podcast. I saw this morning on LinkedIn, they're now celebrating 20 years. So in the podcasting world, that's ancient.
No kidding.
But the key point that I got from the Manager Tools podcast has been put into a book here, The Effective Manager. So Mark Horstman talks about the way I'll put it, the things that one does, the day-to-day activities of a technical engineer and a manager are two different kinds of doing. So the things that I'm responsible for, it's no longer about my pull requests. It's no longer about my test cases that I'm putting together. The 4 behaviors of a manager, it's about getting to know your people as human beings is one of the key behaviors. It's having conversations about their performance. One of your recent podcast episodes was emphasizing not just having the end of year conversation, but making that a regular part of what you do as an ongoing behavior, and then drawing more from them asking to increase that performance. That's a difficult conversation to have, but that's a responsibility of management. And then taking all the things that you finally learned to do as a manager and handing those off to somebody else so that you can grow them and prepare yourself for the next level of advancement. So learning those 4 different doing responsibilities is one of the big ones.
That succession planning, that last element that you were talking to, it seems very important. I'm sure they all are. In my career, at least, that has been a very important one, because from my perspective, if you're not focused on that, at least at some degree, no matter what your level is, um, and I even encourage my engineers to think about succession planning so that they can move up the career ladder and someone else can kind of take their slot, or they can move to a different team and learn a new skill. I think that that's a universal leadership skill that applies to anyone, that sort of grooming that next person and having those relationships. And even as an engineer, or maybe you're not in engineering and you're just a CEO of a SaaS company, and you're thinking, well, I'm at the top. Who do I need to be grooming? Well, do you want to be able to step away from your company and take a vacation? Well, yeah, sure you do. You need somebody to take the reins while you go to Italy or whatever, for a couple of weeks. So I think that succession planning is key, no matter what level that you're at, and having those conversations, teaching others to do your job, whatever your job happens to be. So thank you. Awesome. What are some challenges that you've worked with engineers on that have come into leadership, and they did just really, maybe what's the most common one that you encounter that you deal with the most in regards to, man, I'm really challenged with this, I'm really struggling with, that you really have to work through people on a consistent basis to help them get through that challenge?
It's that internal mindset. I've been so much a part of the team of engineers. I begin to identify as an engineer. And on the one hand, yes, it seeps into how I understand my value based on what I do, which is what we just talked about. If my number of pull requests isn't up the way it used to be, if my number of code reviews, I'm not as active, all the things that I used to do that made me feel valuable, I'm not doing those anymore. It's not just learning the skill of the new doing. It's shifting that identity from somebody who provides value in the doing to somebody who provides value in serving, and learning to shift and recognize that I'm now part of 2 teams. I am a part of the team that I lead, but I am also part of the team of everybody else who reports to my boss.
Yes.
And the identity shift of recognizing that, it's something that Patrick Lencioni talks about in 5 Dysfunctions of a Team.
I have the same book.
Yes. And recognizing that your first team is not the one that you're used to identifying with. Your first team is the peers of yours that report to the same boss, and learning to shift to that 2-way responsibility and managing that, almost a dichotomy of, I now represent the values and the important things of my team. I represent them and speak on their behalf to the organization. And simultaneously, I speak on behalf of the organization and represent the organization to my team members. And I have to wear both hats. I have to speak out of both sides of my mouth and learn to embrace that dual identity now. That's probably the hardest thing to overcome.
Okay. I went through some leadership training that really helped me as a leader with one of the companies that I was with. They put all of the managers through it. And it was talking about how do you become a fabulous leader? And one of the graphs that I thought was really insightful was this, and I'll see if I can find it. And I'll provide a link to it in the comments. But every time you move up in the leadership organization, your competency is now at the bottom of that. So in a similar sort of sense, it's like, hey, I was a great engineer. I was leading the team from a technical perspective, but guess what? Now you have a new job and you're just starting out at this job and you're not going to be the best at it right off the bat. You know, you have a lot to learn, you have experience to gain. That takes time and sometimes coaching or leadership training and understanding kind of where you are on that spectrum, because I see leaders that they first transition into that and they think they're going to be great and it's going to be wonderful. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, wow, this is really different than what I'm used to. And it's sort of a shell shock sort of scenario.
It's what I've started to term as promotion remorse. I took
remorse.
this isn't what I thought it was going to be. I think I want out.
I just want to go back to writing code. It's so much easier because that's where you're comfortable.
Right.
And what I think people need to understand is that happens at every level. Every time you move to that next job. So for instance, one of the scenarios that we haven't really talked about, I don't know if you encounter these, you know, rather than just transitioning from an engineer to a manager, maybe you have a manager that's transitioning to a director. And that's a different role too. So now you're not leading engineers, you're leading other managers. And a lot of times when you get promoted, if you are in a company where you get promoted, you're promoted above your peers. And that's kind of a weird feeling now. Like this person was my peer and now they work for me. And, you know, we used to work side by side. Maybe even I started the job after they started the job. They've been here longer. And maybe you feel guilty about that. But, you know, I think that goes to what Steve was saying here about every person's experience is unique to them. And you it's okay to have those feelings, whatever those feelings are. And I think by having a coach to work through that and to be vulnerable through that is a really helpful thing. Because Steve, as you said at the beginning, like sometimes people get into a scenario where they don't have the opportunity to express that vulnerability because it's counterproductive. So what does that look like in your practice? I'm sure that you've experienced that a lot. And, you know, do you hear people say, oh man, it's so great that I can like just be honest with you?
I've had that sentiment said in almost so many words a couple of times, but really it is when we start to get into the understanding, it's not quite therapy, but sometimes people will say that it feels like therapy to them, where we start to talk about what their beliefs are around things, especially when we get into identity, when we get into learning to manage priorities, or when they're talking about even something as technical as dealing with their calendar and their to-do list and their inbox. And underneath the challenges of those very tactical things is often an issue about belief, what they believe to be true about themselves, about their interactions with others, about other people's expectations of them. And those things are very, very difficult to explore, even personally, when you're just by yourself. And then when you are thinking about other people's expectations, you know your boss has an expectation of you. You know your employer has expectations of you. So to express what you think those expectations are, you almost feel like you have to give the right answer, from their perspective, rather than really having the freedom to explore, what is it I really believe, to somebody who is not going to judge, who does not have a vested interest in seeing you reach a particular conclusion, because that's what helps the company. Knowing that the coach is there, the only person they're there to serve is you, not the company. That makes a huge difference.
I see. Yeah, that's interesting. So you talk about beliefs, which made me think about one of the things that I do as part of the assessment. The very first assessment that I do when I go into a company is I work with the executive team and I talk about values, which I think is very similar, right? Like you're talking about beliefs, which you have to have beliefs in order to have values. But that there's an activity that I go through to make sure that the executive team are all on the same page in regards to values of the company, because I'm looking at it from the company perspective, and make sure that they're in alignment on what those values are. And then I go through a process where, okay, what are the goals that you have associated with those values? And now, are you setting the right expectations around those goals? And are you communicating those goals and communicating those expectations to your people? It sounds like you use a very similar process in regards to coaching. You start with those beliefs, and those beliefs are important. And we talked a little bit about communicating already, and all of those things are important. But yeah, those values and like the belief system that you have as a person, I think it's important to understand yourself, that sort of self-management, self-discovery. You mentioned that at the beginning too. That seems to play a key role in your personal success at any level.
And you highlighted the values, and the values and the beliefs often come when there's into our conversations, at least. The beliefs show up when there's a challenge they're having trouble getting through. Then we can work backwards through beliefs. But like you do with the company, I also do have an exercise that I have freely available on my website. No, you don't even have to give your email address to get it. But it is an exercise for helping one to discover their personal values. Has 10 questions that you would never talk about in a workplace setting. One of the questions is, when was the last time you cried? No boss is ever going to ask that question, but that's in that personal private evaluation to help discover what are the things that I truly value versus the things that I think I'm supposed to value because I've grown up that way. And then be able to really distill it down into 2 or 3 umbrella terms that really help you talk about your values in a way that helps you make decisions, just like you talked about for the corporate world needing to see shared values. And going through that exercise, I really had a really interesting, serendipitous moment where I had given that exercise to somebody that I was working through. And within the next week, their company decided that they were going to go through a company values exercise. So they just really were able to blend those together, help them figure out, this is why I love being in this place. Look at all the shared values that we have.
Sure. Well, this has been great. I wanted to talk here at the end about I talked about values. What is the value that people get out of working with someone like you, working with a coach? What is the number one takeaway that, what do you provide that really sets you apart and that really helps people in whatever way it helps them? What's that number one thing?
If I were to summarize it, I would say it moves the bar of where the Peter Principle kicks in. It allows them, I use the phrase, lets them advance with success and avoid that promotion remorse. You talked about how every time you move up into another level, you're starting with your competency at the bottom.
Yeah.
And you have to be able to move that up towards the top so that you're ready for the next step. We think about the S curves of growth and how what it takes to succeed in one level. Now you have to change strategies to be able to move up to the next, change strategies again to move up to the next. It's allowing people to cross the next threshold and then to cross the next threshold to become that person who can succeed at the next level.
Okay. So wow, that's insightful. So you're actually moving the bar up so that they don't suffer from that Pareto principle where they get promoted past the level of their incompetence and now they're sitting at a level where they're completely incompetent. You help them continually move that up so they can progress. I mean, granted, not everybody's cut out to be a CTO or a CEO, and I think that it's important too for our listeners to understand your limits, right? To understand where you're happy, because not everything is about moving up the ladder and corporate success. I was listening to a book just yesterday, and it was $1 million consulting, I think was the name of the book. And this guy talks about his measure of success is discretionary time. No, his measure of, that's it right there. You've got all the library. That's awesome. Was discretionary time, because it's not just about, your title or how much money you're making, or if you're in the if you're CEO running your SaaS business, what's your annual ARR, how much money the business is making. Having that good work-life balance where, you're spending time in the areas that you love and that you have a balanced life. Lord knows I've been out of balance many times. And I, spend too much time in one area of my life and not enough area in another part of my life that's important to me. I think finding that balance is important for people. So I assume that's something that you help people realize too. You're not just focused on the corporate aspect of it, which is an advantage of having somebody from the outside who's not in the middle of your corporation.
There's an adage among coaches that says all coaching is life coaching. So because we bring our whole person into the workplace. So if there is a life struggle, it is not just a life struggle, it is a business struggle as well. And finding that balance, just like many other life coaches, there's a wheel of life, and what are all the things that are important to you? What's your satisfaction with all of those? I have, one of those exercises as well, because like you said, sometimes advancing with success is not even about being able to move from VP to CTO to whatever the next highest position is. Right. It's about being able to make it to be able to develop the competencies in this skill so that I have the margin to invest in my family, to invest in my personal growth, to invest in my faith, to invest in my community, to fulfill and round out all the rest of it, so that I am not just constantly underwater in my day job.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, there's so many elements of who we are as people that make us healthy, both mentally and physically, that we need to provide those things the right amount of attention so that we're not unhealthy and unbalanced in that regard. So this has been great, Steve. Any other last minute thoughts that you'd like to leave with our listeners?
I would say that you talked about moving up in everything being, you start with that low level of competency, just recognizing that moving into people management is a skill. It's not just a promotion, it is a career change, but like all skills, it can be learned. And I love what Zig Ziglar used to say. He would say, anything worth doing is worth doing poorly until you can learn to do it well. So embrace that feeling of incompetency at the beginning. You can learn this, and it can become fulfilling so that you don't have to look back and wish you hadn't taken it.
Very insightful. I love that. Thank you so much. And
Thank you, Drew.
everybody, for listening. All right, we'll end it there. Cool. Thank you, Steve. I appreciate you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for inviting me. This is a great opportunity.